I'm Tim Barnett, and thank you very much for the introduction. I'm Chief Executive of FinCap, and really good to be here today. We've put the presentation out on the table, but more importantly than that, I've got Anne with me, who's going to introduce herself right now, so that you know you've got somebody from the national organisation and somebody who knows the work on the ground. So, Anne, you just tell people who you are, and then we can go through. So.
Ko Amy ko Kuinga, he sent us the full Ki Aotahu e Mahi Wahi. So I'm the financial coaching coordinator at St Vincent de Paul in Otahu. It's a service that is there for the purpose of serving the poor, and we take donations of food, clothing and furniture for whānau in our local community, and we also provide financial coaching one-on-one. So that's my role.
Great, thank you, Anne.
I can jump in as you go, or did you want me to go?
Oh no, jump in as we go.
Yeah,
So what we're going to do, I'm going to talk a bit about the kind of national overview, and Anne's going to jump in and talk about her role as a financial mentor on the ground. And I think probably what you need from us is a bit of both. As I said, my name's Tim. I come from a NGO management and political background. I was a Labour Member of Parliament for 12 years in the 1990s under the previous Labour-led government. Prior to that, I ran a community law centre. My very first lobbying job in Britain was as the very first person, actually, to work on behalf of lesbian and gay rights in the UK. And my mother, who was never very sure of that part of my character, when she read in the newspaper that I was Britain's first professional homosexual, she decided that was quite an interesting title and gave me a certain status, so I can still live with that one. So I emigrated to New Zealand in 91, got elected to Parliament in 96, and interesting because I've represented Christchurch Central, so issues of casinos, issues of problem gambling were very real to my reality there. And coming from the community law centre, the whole role of NGOs in society was just fundamental to what I believed in. And then I got on to the select committee that dealt with the problem gambling legislation. So we were there to just forward some of the detail going around the country here about some of the issues. So I came out of that experience of my life with a real admiration for the approach taken and for the dedication of networks like yours. Then I wandered off to South Africa, and I worked with the UN, and I worked with sex worker rights groups there. Then I came back to be the Labour Party General Secretary. Then I moved to Tūhoe to be the group manager at iwi. So I've had a kind of what they call a varied background. And from that, in July 2 years ago, I became the CE of FinCap. And that's where I am today. So my theme of what we're going to talk about, our theme, is about new, thoughtful, structured relationships between our network and the work that you do. So that's what we want you to get out of this session. Obviously, there's time at the end for you to ask questions. But if I just, yep, this works. So my first slide, and Anne's going to leap in a second, is that I thought I'd start with the individual. The crucial thing for you to appreciate, I guess, is that we have this large network of financial mentors. Around New Zealand, there are 1,200 mentors, such as Anne. They see around 60,000 people a year, and that isn't just a casual passing conversation. That is typically a 1 hour structured session where that person starts to unload their financial life, their stresses, their issues, and that conversation, that interaction is crucial. So, Anne, yep. That's where you can step in.
Do I need to?
Yes, please. You want to come over here? Actually, it might be easier. You want to come over here and talk?
Oh, no, this is
okay.
Okay, yeah, so just building on that. People will come to our service for a whole varied number of reasons. Some are referred, some come on their own. everyone that comes through the door is seeking support, and no one, I think, wants to fail. They all want to achieve a better outcome for themselves. So working on that premise, we come from a client focus, and we deliver using a strength-based approach. There's never usually a one-off session. That's not the ideal anyway. The service that I'm at is probably about 70% ongoing and perhaps 30% one-off. For the one-off people will be people that are maybe not ready or not at a point to change yet. So there's an initial conversation here which might not lead on at that point. Our role is, effectively in the first session, an awful lot of listening, as you will all know, I'm sure, and we're trying to gauge the history, the story that is presenting with that person, how they came to be where they are today, sitting in front of us. So taking into account all of the economic, environmental, cultural stuff that's been going on in their lives, as well as their own behaviours, and then looking at the financial position as it is now. We try to create a platform to then build on to help them move forward. But the platform has to acknowledge and incorporate all of those things that they brought to the table. And part of that is addiction is really challenging for us to deal with because we're not trained in that area, and we know how much that will span every part of their lives. So we could create the prettiest and nicest plan with the person, but if they're not getting the support for that addiction or for other things that are going on in their lives, it's probably going to fail. And we don't like not being able to support people to a positive outcome. So it would be awesome for us if there was a closer integration and collaboration of services to the point even where appointments were interweaved, where there was a relationship with a gambling counsellor, for example, and where there was a strategy that we were planning together that could really wrap around that person. It would be awesome. The gambling clients that I've worked with have made some progress, but because I had no control over the relationship they had externally with that gambling support person, it didn't go as far as it could have. Fell over. We had to keep going back again and again, and they did make some progress, but I was aware that I was never able to extend into that part of that issue, that area. Yeah. The service that I work at is predominantly Pacific Island clients actually, and the majority are Samoan. So we have about 50% PI clients, we have about 40% Māori clients, and 10% of other ethnicities. Yeah. Cool.
Thanks. And just to give you one story which I've heard from more than one financial mentor, such as Anne, is that as part of that 1 hour initial conversation and the ongoing relationship, the client is very likely to have a copy of their bank statement so that they can explain their spending. And an overseas payment on that may well be some kind of evidence of online gambling. So that can be the trigger for a conversation. So the stigma, there's a stigma about budgeting, as you guys know much better than me. There's a stigma about problem gambling, but put the two together and you actually need to get the clues, and the financial mentors need the clues to start developing that conversation. So that's where we see that link coming. As Anne said, what used to be, we'll pop in to get a budget, has now become a much more rounded, holistic conversation, and that's the strengths-based approach that our network is getting into. Budget services have been around for about half a century. They started as Department of Social Welfare, the Ministry of Maori Affairs, and local volunteers forming literally home budgeting committees, groups of volunteers and state employees who used to go into people's homes to give them budgeting help. A lot's happened since then, but out of that initiative half a century ago there emerged a lot of charities. There are now 201 agencies such as Anne. Some are standalone budget services, some are budgeting, financial mentoring within a bigger organisation, and they deliver from about 300 locations. And we also have a national helpline called Money Talks. So that's what we are sort of laying out for you today. It's a changing scene. as things do change. And I think our network was probably, in terms of, I didn't quite realise when I got my new job, but our network has gone through probably one of the most profound reforms of any of the NGO networks. So led by particularly Paula Bennett and Anne Tolley in the last government, there was a move to try and, I guess, transform, upgrade, develop. I mean, different people have different views, but the money was looked at, and there was a bit of an increase in the money, and it was given to fewer services, so slightly higher, but still the average funding per service is about $80,000. So these are not particularly well-funded organisations. The language and the concepts, Anne mentioned strengths-based, budget advisors, the language that we're now encouraging is financial mentor, and you can understand that has a different emphasis in it. And the concept of financial capability is about not just getting your budget sorted out, but actually developing the long-term skills to cope. So that's been the transformation we've gone through. One element which about half the services deliver is something called MoneyMates. So MoneyMates is peer-to-peer facilitated learning, where groups of people who maybe are getting mentoring at the same time, or maybe they're leading into that, or maybe they're coming out of that. It's pretty flexible, but they go through a facilitated process of talking about money, talking about how they cope, how they can actually work better in their lives to get things better. And that socialization in that group can actually be pretty crucial. I was talking to a financial mentor earlier who met me for breakfast here, and she said that to her, having met a number of clients who had gambling challenges, that the socialization of that kind of group replaces some of the socialization that some people get in some forms of gambling. So that actually it's a way to actually be talking about positive, constructive things that are going to benefit you. So we're going through lots of changes, but I would say that the authenticity of our network has been absolutely retained. Quite a lot of those 201 services are volunteer-based. Maybe they have one coordinator, and the financial mentors are volunteers. And because we've got 200 of them, it means that in settlements like Murupara and Gore and Te Aroha, we've got a budget service in Whangamata, Whangaparoa. We've got a really big network so that they're close to people. I was talking to a woman called Margaret who runs a budget service in Waihi, and 17 years ago when she started, there were 12 government-funded agencies in her community, and now there are 2, of which one is a budget service. So these are, our network are the survivors, because what we're doing is something so fundamental and common to every service, which is great. In terms of the people who come through the doors, the profile is around half the 60,000 people a year who utilise the service are Māori, 12% Pacifica, 70% women, and 70% are in receipt of benefit. And that profile, looking back on our statistics, is pretty unchanged for a generation. And the other figure, which I didn't put up here, is that the total debt which comes through the door with those 60,000 clients is $600 million a year. So an average of around 10,000 a head. Vastly variable. You go to North Harbour service and they've got an average of 60,000 a head. Some of the services will be way, way lower. But we're handling large amounts of debt which relates to personal, like family, friends, relates to government debt, it relates to finance companies, it relates to banks, it relates to utilities. And we now have a fairly good statistical breakdown of all that. And again, we think there are ways in which linking in problem gambling issues could actually help to enrich that conversation.
And
Yeah,
just add to that,
you jump in.
And we see our role as helping to build financial capability and resilience in clients, and it's a resilience part that I think an enhanced relationship would benefit from, because at the moment the resilience, the ability to bounce back, is where people that have perhaps had previous challenges, behavioural addictions, when the going gets tough, that would be when that might hit back in. Yeah.
So just, thanks Anne, just following on the issue of data, so we have a system called Client Voices, which is where essentially it's used as the client management tool for 2/3 of those 60,000 people. Some, like Salvation Army, have their own systems that can talk to our system, but 40,000 people a year have their data going onto that system. We're just getting it revamped as ever. We've had it cost our predecessor organisation $10,000 to get put in, and it's now costing $750,000 to revamp. So it's a bit of an idea about the reality of IT. But that we're doing some work at the moment to look at what is already in that system relating to gambling, because there are one or two questions asked by mentors around gambling, but we don't think it's going to be adequate. But once that's redone, we think there are ways in which that could actually be a really useful information source to help you and to help us in our work. So just kind of continuing that theme, I guess, we're well aware that the budgeting is often I say soft is the wrong word, but it's the entryway to other conversations, so that the studies show that if there is a budgeting service that has a focus around smoking addiction, that can be a more effective way to get people into behavioural change than a service that focuses on the addiction itself. So it's a way to begin a conversation about a whole lot of things that the individual may be hiding, have hidden, or is suppressing in some way. Don't know if you want to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was going to say that. I think the reason we can do that is it's very laid back. And I apologise if I'm wearing these like running shoes today. I didn't realise I was going to be coming for that last. But so they're not interrogated in any way when they come in. It's really about sitting down, having a cup of tea. How's it going? What's brought you in today? Back in the olden days, you might say something like, "How can I help you?" But we've even taken that away, and it's about what's up kind of thing. And we do find that if we can, you put that time and effort in the session, again, as I'm sure you all know, build that rapport and get that trust with the person. And sometimes even by the end of the first session or the second session, a lot more stuff is going to come out, and they are happy to share that. And particularly, we have found with some of our Pacific Island clients that they find us an outreach that is removed from the family enough so that they can share a lot more.
Yep. Thanks. So it's the cost of those addictions which is a trigger. The challenge for us is knowing, once we've identified an issue, where to refer people to, and obviously in remote rural locations or people who've got particular language or cultural needs, that's a particular challenge. But as we try to enrich our network, getting the right relationships, the right collaborations, the right skills and financial mentors in the right places to refer people through to becomes crucial. And we think probably, and there's a lot more study to do, but the population cohort that we are particularly focusing on in our services are likely to have a higher than 0.7% prevalence of problem gambling. So that's a kind of strong base to start from. You may wonder what this FinCap thing is. So FinCap, there was a federation of family budgeting for many years. A few dramas happened along the way. And eventually the government, as part of this reorganisation, said we want a new leadership in this sector. And they didn't want another membership organisation. So we don't have any members. We have a board and that's it. But what we receive core funding from MSD of around just under $1 million a year. And that essentially funds our central operation based out of Wellington. And we are there to provide the training, the data, the IT, the networking, the representation roles for the network, but also we're there to be a bit of a disruptor and a bit of an innovator. So we're there not to sustain the network as it is, but also to encourage new relationships such as potentially this one, to see how things go forward. And you'll see in the pink brochure, you'll see just a bit of a snapshot that was produced. That was our very first bit of publicity. And that was produced really reflecting on our first year of operation. But you'll see from that just a bit of a snapshot of the work we do in the network that we're dealing with. So in terms of where we might go forward together, there's some quite compelling ideas that we've been having some conversations with the ministry about, and which is now going to start to flow through our wider organisation. As Anne mentioned, the strengths-based approach is crucial. Budgeting is that vector to identify problem gambling, wanting to deepen the role of our organisations, and a lot more. So that could look like better training, it could look like better data, it could also recognise that the sorted whānau approach has actually given us a whole level of information about this relationship between budgeting, financial capability and gambling, and there's some overlap between the agencies working in sorted whānau and the network that we work with, so how we can actually do some of that cross-learning. And that's essentially what we've come here today to talk about. I was going to end with one more thing. You may wonder why the huia bird is on our logo. We had a long drama about trying to get our name sorted, and one of my colleagues who's an artist and a cartoonist in our team came up with the huia, and the compelling story about the huia, and there were a number of stories, you'll know it's now extinct. It's a treasured bird in Māoridom. The huia feather was one of the great feathers used in fashion, but what's particularly unusual about the huia is that the male and female had different shaped beaks. The male had a stronger straight beak. So if, for example, they were trying to get grubs and so on out of a piece of rotting wood, the male would go in and sort of make the split in the wood a bit wider with their beak, and the female, which is depicted here, with a curved beak, would then go in and pick the grubs out. But what that meant is that if one of the pair were to die, then the other one would also die because they're starved to death. So it was this extraordinary symbol of that codependency, and the whole work in our sector is around that codependency between the person who is seeking support around budgeting and the person who is trained as a mentor, and that relationship is crucial and at the heart of really this conversation that we're having here today. Kia ora, thank you.